Kings, queens, beyonds and in-betweens. It's me. Hi, I'm Effilimrance, it's me. And in this video I will be talking about my problems with the song Cancelled by Taylor Swift. In the song she aims to somewhat portray herself as a victim of cancel culture, and embraces a narrative that instead paints being cancelled as something desirable and as something unifying that ties her and her friends together. At the core of it, it touches on a real problem, and one that is related to her own biography, namely fabricated scandals around her persona that led to changes in public perception, mainly related to the Kanye and Kim Kardashian phone call video incident. In the song, Swift uses diverse vanities such as having too much fun or girl bossing too hard as examples that trigger cancellations that are impossible to stop once the discourse is started by those she portrays as masked crusaders. Her use of the image of masked crusaders is one that implies that those behind such discourses think that they fight for good, but base their value system on false presuppositions, and thereby hurt everyone that doesn't subscribe to their own set of values. Therefore, their actions must seem unjust and unjustified. Further, Taylor tries to relativize those cancel discourses not only through her use of the just mentioned vanities as examples, but by further pointing out that everyone's got bodies in the attic, or took somebody's man. A proposition that then leads her to suggest that, instead of possibly being better or talking about underlying issues, one should learn the art of not getting caught. Now, I have multiple problems with the narratives the song embraces and will try to explain why that is. First off, I'm not saying that Taylor can't legitimately see herself as a victim here, and that her outrage over what happened after the edited phone call with Kanye was released isn't justified. Neither am I trying to critique her pointing out that there are some gender double standards in the industry and the general mediatized public that oftentimes lead to comparatively more negative reactions in media coverage when potentially problematic acts are done by women. Her pointing that out is all fine, appropriate, and important. Where the song goes into a troubling direction for me is by on the one hand leveling the playing field, by relativizing all the criticizable actions and boiling them down to the sentiment that everyone has bodies in the attic. Also, it on the other hand hops on the discursive train that frames cancel culture as unjust and misguided. In the current time and embedded especially into the political climate of the US, this actually comes off as quite tone-deaf, negligent, and ignorant at best. In a time where the alt-right, right-wing populists, or straight-up fascists, use wokeness and quote-unquote cancel culture as scapegoats and justifications for creating victim narratives around themselves and their privileged way to live and see the world, it seems a little bizarre to put out a track that embraces such narratives. Not only is this a slap in the face of everyone that fights against fascists and other social injustices in an attempt to create a more inclusive, open-minded world that is centered around equality and justness, it also delegitimizes such attempts to call out problematic behavior, as Taylor seems to embrace a let the one without sin cast the first stone kind of argument that can be used as an easy defense for those called out, that further shifts the focus point of the discourse itself. So, what I want to critique is Taylor seemingly hopping on the culture war discourse that is embraced and upheld by the alt-right against wokeness and cancel culture, by only painting it as unjust, exaggerated, and harmful. She thereby falls into the trap of discrediting cancel discourses altogether, or at least puts up with the song being interpreted in such a way. That this is dangerous cannot only be seen in the witch hunting of alt-right fascists against wokeness or Antifa that have become an enemy image across the world for them. It also relativizes even the worst things that rightfully spark social outrage and the attempt to cancel someone, like those involved in the Epstein case or some neo-Nazi black metal bands. Especially for someone in Taylor's position, who through her fame and publicity has enormous discursive impact and therefore possibly unwanted discursive responsibility, it just seems irresponsible to add fuel to the fire of the already raging culture war against wokeness that sometimes is used as a representation of left or progressive thinking altogether. The song therefore becomes comparable to songs like Zombified by Falling in Reverse, a band led by Ronald Radke, who in it complains how they'll never let go of something you said 10 years ago. They're canceling you, and they won't stop until everybody's zombified. Now, if you know nothing about this band, go watch the last video Fantano made about Ronald Radke. That shows quite well who he is and what he stands for, and it shows how his attempts to frame cancel culture as the actual problem and only relying on outdated information are quite delusional. To have him and Taylor participate in a similar manner in the same discourse should be concerning, and was not something on my bingo card this year. So, as I said, her general skepticism and critique is more than justified, but the song isn't nuanced enough for what it actually talks about, and doesn't do the topic justice. Therefore, we could ask ourselves, how could the song have been otherwise? If Taylor felt the need to talk about her experiences with cancel culture, she could also have made a song that reflected on the mechanisms of clickbait culture and media sensationalism, or about how narratives evolve and take on a life on their own, or simply have talked about the ambiguous and double-edged sword that cancel culture can become in the context of political propaganda, and when abused by those that aim to change the world for the worse, or are only interested in personal gain. She also could have talked about the horrifying Swifties for Trump AI campaign attempt, and how more wokeness and sensibilization could actually be helpful. Therefore, she could have talked about the positive effects of Me Too, of publicly pointing out diverse ranges of social issues that might all be grouped under a cancel discourse, and how she actually advocates those fights. In the context of the current political climate, and embedded into what the life of a showgirl might entail, such broader reflections would have been more than welcome, and would have fit into the topic the album seemingly wants to portray, at least when we follow its title. I personally think that it is quite important to participate in discourses that publicly discuss social injustices and abusive behavior. But I can also understand how in certain cases such public discourses might seem like a person is completely reduced to those actions, which can then lead to attempts of fighting back or attempts to discredit the whole mechanism itself. In this defensive shift, there however seems to lie a danger, which is that in establishing a victim position that aims to get sympathy and establish an us versus them mentality, the focus of the discussion also shifts away from the underlying issues to the discourse about being cancelled, its effects, and the often embraced us versus them narratives itself, and willingly or not, joins into the culture war against wokeness and cancel culture at large. While it is certainly true that we might not have found the best or final way to handle controversy and critically talk about mishaps of those around us, especially when they are public figures, reactions that simply paint those involved as victims themselves also seem far from a constructive way forward. And it especially gives those that are rightfully called out an easy way out. And although many complain about cancellations or being cancelled, the reality seems to be that most of them aren't really, and can mostly continue doing what they do, especially in recent times when there seems to be an increasingly bigger crowd actually enjoying those victim narratives of those that claim to be unrightfully cancelled. Overall, I think complaining about cancel culture is just the easiest way out of an unpleasant situation, one that allows you to not critically engage with the issues at hand and to not admit to having done something wrong or debatable. I also feel like the fear of public repercussions when admitting something is so massive that it makes it hard for public figures to openly and honestly engage in a critical discussion about their behavior, show remorse, and aim to be better in the future. Although this is something I would advocate for, as I think that most of us are generally forgiving when we see that there is understanding and serious attempts to be better and an attempt to actively work against the structures that might be involved in the own problematic behavior. One positive example for this is the German metalcore band Electric Callboy, who were originally named Eskimo Callboy and had some sexist and racist lyrics in their early works. After being called out some years ago, they publicly engaged in a process of reflection. They made videos that showed them in conversation with, for example, a professor for Greenlandic and Antarctic studies, to critically engage with their original use of the word Eskimo. Not only did it spread public awareness, it also gave them a solid base to go through with the name change. They also re-recorded some of the older songs and changed the lyrics to get rid of the discriminating language. And I feel like, apart from the usual anti-woke conservative edgelords in the alternative community, this was taken very positively, and the band is now more popular than ever. But of course, it really depends on what you did, and it is quite a subjective question, how and when you are willing to forgive certain behaviors. When we compare this case to others, like that of Rammstein for example, yeah, well, there would have to be many years of incredibly in-depth work to make up for what they did, allegedly. But back to the topic at hand. What I would have loved from Taylor on the new record would have been to take a more explicit political stand, to condemn the rise of fascism and what is currently happening in the US, and to once again solidarize with those, especially but not exclusively, from the LGBTQI+ community, and to not write songs that portray her as the victim in mean online discourses, and talk about suffering from a terminal uniqueness or how big the dick of your fiance is. But at the same time, it is important to remember that Taylor doesn't owe me or anyone anything, and that she can express herself artistically however she chooses. Now, this is a whole enormous topic in itself, but one could also ask questions about the relationship of capitalism, pop music, success, and the embrace of love as the most central theme of such music. One might theorize that this focus on love as a personalized struggle that monopolizes suffering and boils it down to a personal relationship also serves the function in a capitalist exploitative system, to shift attention away from other aspects of life that make us feel miserable beyond failed love, like exploitation, injustices, and marginalization. On the other hand, of course, one could also argue that lyrics about love are rather uncontroversial and are probably relatable for most of us. Anyway, that is all for now. Hope you found some of it interesting or somewhat insightful. Let me know what you think about what I said, and if you want to see me talk more about Taylor Swift or the relationship of pop music, love, and capitalism, make sure to like the video. Okay, see you soon. Bye!